Hey everyone, welcome back. We are diving into some excerpts from a pretty thought-provoking article today. It's called "The Cowardice of America's Political Class: Ohio's Bathroom Ban as a Blueprint for a Sick System," written by Dr. Jaime Hoerricks. And wow, does she make some strong points.
Yeah, no kidding. Dr. Hoerricks, she really lays out a compelling argument for how lawmakers are kind of sneaking controversial policies into law,
Hmm.
using these must-pass bills kind of like a Trojan horse.
Oh, okay. So that sounds a little ominous. Can you give us the big picture here? What's at the heart of her argument?
Sure. Basically, Dr. Hoerricks argues that this strategy, it really takes advantage of how our democracy works. Like voters and even lawmakers themselves, a lot of times they just don't have the time to really scrutinize every single detail of a bill.
Right.
So they depend on like summaries or headlines, and they have to kind of trust that their elected officials are, being honest. And that's where the whole cowardice thing comes in.
Yeah.
Instead of debating controversial issues openly, they're kind of burying them in these bills that absolutely have to pass.
So it's like a political sleight of hand, like a magic trick.
Yeah, exactly. And Dr. Hoerricks uses a really specific example to illustrate this whole thing. Ohio's SB 104. It bans transgender individuals from using bathrooms that match their gender identity, specifically on college campuses.
Right, SB 104. I remember that caused a lot of controversy when it was passed. But how does this bill tie in to this bigger idea of a rigged system?
Okay, so that's where it gets really interesting. Dr. Hoerricks argues that SB 104, it's not just like a one-off incident. It's actually like a perfect example of a much bigger trend. This bill, they snuck it into a bill about college credit programs for high schoolers. Something you'd think would be totally uncontroversial, something that just has to get passed.
Oh, so by attaching this bathroom ban to a must-pass bill, they basically guaranteed it would become law?
Yep, and that's where the cowardice comes in. Dr. Hoerricks, who's a trans woman herself, she's saying lawmakers knew this policy wouldn't pass if it was on its own. It's like a way to dodge public scrutiny to avoid being held accountable.
Wow. It's certainly clever, if a bit sneaky. And that bill's title, Protect All Students Act, that seems almost intentionally misleading, doesn't it?
Totally. Dr. Hoerricks calls it textbook Orwellian doublespeak. And the thing is, this kind of sneaky maneuvering, it's not new at all. It's been happening in American politics for ages.
Oh, really? So this coward's path, as she calls it, it's got a history. This isn't some new tactic.
Not at all. And here's where it gets even more worrying. This isn't a one-party thing either, this tactic. It's used by both sides. It's like a bipartisan tool for hiding things. Dr. Hoerricks, she gives examples of how it's been used to sneak in all sorts of stuff. Anti-abortion measures, environmental deregulation. Remember that bill about farm subsidies back in the 90s? Hidden in there was this provision that basically gutted the Clean Water Act. It took a few years, but people were outraged once they figured it out. But by then, the damage was done.
Wow, yeah, that's a pretty clear example. So you're saying we've all probably been tricked by this at some point, no matter what our politics are.
Probably, yeah. Think about it. Have you ever been surprised by a new law? Like it came out of nowhere. There's a good chance it was hidden inside a bigger bill, just hiding in plain sight.
That is kind of unsettling, honestly. It feels like we as voters are playing a game that's rigged, you know?
That's exactly Dr. Hoerricks' point. It's like this system is designed to keep regular people from having power. It's not just about specific policies either. It's about eroding trust. It's about undermining democracy at its core.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this one example, this bathroom ban in Ohio, is actually just the tip of the iceberg. Dr. Hoerricks argues that this has been used across the political spectrum. But why? Why would they resort to these tactics in the first place?
Well, it boils down to avoiding being held accountable. By attaching these policies to bills that have to pass, they're basically making themselves invisible. They're betting that most people won't have the time or energy to read every single line of a bill.
So it's a gamble. They're assuming any backlash will be small and die down quickly.
Exactly. And sadly, more often than not, they're right. Public attention spans are short. The news moves fast. By the time folks realize what's happened, it's usually too late. It's law, and the media's onto something else.
This is starting to feel like a conspiracy theory, but you're saying this is real, documented, not just speculation.
Oh, it's definitely real. And Dr. Hoerricks has the receipts to prove it. She points to stuff like how California's rent control laws were weakened. They used confusing language in ballot initiatives and then spent a ton on ads to sell it as protecting renters. Sound familiar?
Yeah. It's like they think we're all fools. This is seriously disheartening. And if it works so well, if it's been used for so long by both sides, what does that say about the state of our democracy?
That's a question Dr. Hoerricks wrestles with in the article. And it's one we should all be thinking about. Because if this keeps going, if we let our lawmakers keep doing this, then the whole idea of transparency and accountability in government, it's all at stake.
It's like one of those shell games where you're watching the must-pass bill and then bam, something totally different sneaks in under the radar. And sometimes that something can be really harmful. It feels kind of sneaky and dishonest.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Dr. Hoerricks argues that this is even more effective now because of Citizens United. With all this money in politics, it's easier than ever to kind of manipulate what people think, to silence anyone who disagrees.
Right.
You know?
Right. Citizens United. Can you remind me about that? I know it was a big deal, but it's been a while. How does it connect to this?
Sure. So basically, Citizens United said that corporations and rich donors, they have the same free speech rights as people, which means they can spend as much money as they want on campaigns. And what happened? The folks with the deepest pockets now have way more influence on how laws get made.
And Dr. Hoerricks is saying that this makes this problem, this sneaky lawmaking stuff, even worse.
Exactly. Think about it. If you're like a big special interest group and you want something controversial, it's way easier to just kind of slip it in the back door than to convince the public that it's a good idea.
So instead of having an open debate and trying to win people over, they can just buy their way in.
Yeah. I mean, it's cynical, but that's kind of how it works a lot of the time. And this goes back to Dr. Hoerricks' main point. It's not just about individual laws. It's about how the whole system is rigged to favor the wealthy and powerful.
This is all pretty heavy stuff, honestly. It can feel kind of hopeless. Is there anything we can do about this? What can regular people do to push back?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And Dr. Hoerricks, she doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but she does offer some solutions. For starters, she says we need a lot more transparency in how laws get made. Right now, it's way too easy for this stuff to slip through unnoticed.
Okay, sure, but how do we actually do that? It's not like we can just make the government more transparent overnight.
Well, no, it's going to take work. It might mean changing the laws. Things like making it so people have to disclose more about their campaign donations and lobbying, or pushing for the public to have access to more government meetings and documents. But most importantly, it's about changing how we think. We have to demand more from our elected officials.
So we need to be more involved, more informed, and maybe a little more skeptical.
Exactly. We can't just trust that our representatives are doing the right thing. We need to hold them accountable.
Okay, I get that. But it can also feel pretty overwhelming. Where do you even start?
I think the first step is just being aware of the problem. We need to educate ourselves about how this system actually works, where the loopholes are, and who's benefiting from them. The more we understand how the game is played, the better we can be at changing the rules.
Right, knowledge is power, as they say. But just knowing about a problem doesn't really change anything. We have to actually do something with that knowledge.
Totally. And that's where civic engagement comes in. We need to contact our representatives, go to town hall meetings, organize protests, support advocacy groups, and vote in every single election.
Yeah.
It might sound cheesy, but every vote really does matter.
Okay, I'm with you. But let's be real. Most people are busy, they have jobs, families, and honestly, politics can be exhausting. How do we get people to actually care enough to get involved?
Yeah, that's the tricky part. There's no easy answer.
Yeah.
But I think Dr. Hoerricks would say that we need to make it personal. We need to show people how these political issues affect their lives.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Let's go back to that bathroom ban in Ohio. At first glance, it might seem like something that only affects a small group of people. But it's actually part of a much larger attack on LGBTQ+ rights. And that has real consequences for people, families, and entire communities.
Okay, I see what you mean. If we show people how these issues are affecting real people's lives, we can make it feel more real, more urgent.
Exactly. That's how you build a movement. You start by showing people how these things that seem really abstract actually have a real impact on their lives and the lives of those around them.
So it's about finding that emotional connection, that thing that makes people passionate and makes them want to get involved.
Yep. And that's what Dr. Hoerricks is talking about. Not just awareness, but action. Not just getting angry, but actually doing something.
It's like she's calling for a political awakening.
I think that's a good way to put it. She wants us to wake up and see how this system really works and to take responsibility for creating the kind of democracy we want to live in.
That's a powerful message, but it's a lot to process. I'm wondering, where does the media fit into all this? We talked about how the government needs to be transparent and accountable, but what about the media's role in holding those in power accountable?
That's a really important question. And Dr. Hoerricks, she criticizes the media's role in all of this. She
Uh-huh.
says that the media often focuses on the who's winning and who's losing part of politics, like it's a horse race,
Mm.
instead of really digging into the issues.
So it's more about entertainment than information.
A lot of times, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a problem because when the media doesn't really cover these issues, it makes it easier for these sneaky tactics to work. It's like they're accidentally helping to cover up these shady maneuvers.
Wow. I never thought of it that way. So you're saying the media is kind of complicit in this whole rigged system?
Well, complicit might be a strong word, but I do think the media has a responsibility to do better.
Okay, so what does better look like? What can the media do to help fix this?
I think it starts with investigative journalism. We need reporters who are willing to dig deep, follow the money, and expose these kinds of tricks.
Right, because if this is happening in secret, someone has to bring it to light.
Exactly. And that's what investigative journalism does. It's about holding powerful people accountable, exposing corruption, giving a voice to the people who are often ignored.
But investigative journalism is expensive, and it takes a lot of time. It's not exactly a moneymaker.
You're right. And that's part of the problem. These days, the media is all about making money. So investigative journalism is becoming more and more rare.
It's like a catch-22 then. We need investigative journalism to expose these problems, but the media doesn't want to do it because it doesn't make money.
It's a tough situation for sure. And it benefits the people in power. The less scrutiny they get, the more they can get away with.
This is starting to feel kind of bleak again. Are there any good examples out there, any media outlets that are doing it right, holding those in power accountable and showing people these shady tactics?
Oh, absolutely. There are some nonprofit news organizations that are doing amazing work. Places like ProPublica and the Center for Public Integrity. And there are still some big-name outlets that do investigative reporting, like the New York Times and the Washington Post.
That's good to hear, but even with those places doing good work, it still feels like an uphill battle.
It is. But it's a battle worth fighting. Because the alternative is a system where the powerful can do whatever they want, where the public is kept in the dark, and where democracy is at risk.
Okay, I need a minute to process all of this. This deep dive has taken us down some pretty dark paths. It's a lot to think about.
It is. But these are conversations we need to have. We need to shine a light on these issues, and we need to demand better from our leaders and from the media.
I agree. Before we wrap up this part and talk about Dr. Hoerricks' solutions, maybe we can just pause here for a sec to let our listeners take it all in. It's a lot to digest, and I'm sure they have a lot to think about. Okay, so we've talked about how things are, well, maybe not ideal in our political system. Sometimes it feels like the game is rigged, right? But the good news is Dr. Hoerricks doesn't just leave us with a bunch of doom and gloom. She actually offers some ideas about what we can do about it. And that's what I want to focus on now. What can we do to fight back against this?
You're right, she does. And it's kind of refreshing, you know. It'd be easy to just get totally discouraged by all this. But Dr. Hoerricks, she really believes that we as citizens, we have a lot more power than we think.
Okay, I'm all ears. What does she suggest? Because honestly, after everything we've talked about, I'm not sure where to even begin. It feels kind of like David and Goliath, you know?
I hear you.
Yeah.
But hey, remember David won that fight. And one of Dr. Hoerricks' main points is that change, it usually starts from the bottom up. It's about people realizing they can make a difference if they work together. It's about demanding more from the people in charge.
So it's not just about individual actions like voting or contacting a representative. It's got to be something bigger.
Right. It's about creating a movement. It's about changing the whole culture of politics, you know, making sure that being transparent and accountable is just how things are done,
Yeah.
not some rare exception. And that takes a lot of people working together for a long time.
Okay, so how do we go from feeling powerless to actually building a movement? I mean, people are busy, they've got jobs, families. How do we get folks excited about something as complicated as, well, as boring as how laws get made?
Yeah, that is the question, isn't it? And Dr. Hoerricks doesn't pretend there's like a simple step-by-step guide, because honestly, there isn't. But she does talk about some strategies that have worked in the past.
Like what? What kind of things have been successful before?
Well, she talks about how important it is to build coalitions, you know, getting different groups of people together, even if they don't always agree on everything, as long as they have that same goal of making the system better. Like, think about the environmental movement or the fight for marriage equality. Those were really long, hard fights. But they won because people from all different backgrounds came together and demanded change.
Yeah, strength in numbers, right? But it can't just be about protests and marches, right? Don't we need to actually change the laws themselves?
Absolutely. And Dr. Hoerricks talks about something called strategic litigation. Basically, it's about challenging these sneaky tactics in court. She mentions groups like the ACLU and the Brennan Center for Justice. They're already doing some awesome work fighting this stuff in court.
So it's kind of like a two-pronged approach then. Activism on the ground and legal challenges in the courts.
Exactly. And they actually work together too. Public pressure can influence what happens in court, and winning a court case can really energize a movement. It's like they feed off each other.
Okay, I'm seeing how this could work, but it still feels like a really tough challenge. How do we get people to believe that they can actually make a difference?
That's where storytelling comes in. Dr. Hoerricks says we got to connect these kind of abstract political ideas to real people's lives. We need to show the real consequences of these sneaky tactics.
Oh, I see what you mean. Instead of just talking about like environmental deregulation, we tell the story of a family whose water got polluted because of a loophole that was snuck into a bill,
Yep.
something like that.
Exactly. Make it personal. Make it relatable. Show people that this isn't just some political game. It's about real lives and real consequences.
Right, because stories, they have the power to make people feel something, to inspire them to take action, but we also have to be realistic. This is a really messed up system we're up against. It's not going to change overnight.
Definitely not. And Dr. Hoerricks knows that. This is a long game. It's about making small changes over time and never giving up hope.
So it's about being in it for the long haul.
Yep. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And you got to really believe that things can get better, even when it seems impossible.
This conversation has been super insightful, but honestly, it's been a lot to take in.
I know what you mean. It's a lot to process. But I think it's really important to end on a hopeful note. Yes, the system's messed up in a lot of ways, but it can change. We, the people, we have the power to make it better. It starts with being aware of the problem, then taking action, and most importantly, never giving up on fighting for a better, fairer world.
Well said. I think that's a perfect way to end this deep dive. Thank you so much for being such a great guide through all of this.
It's been my pleasure. And to all our listeners out there, you're not alone in this. There are tons of people and organizations working hard to fix our political system. Find your people, get involved, and never forget that you can make a difference.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay involved, and stay hopeful.